Welcome everybody to this fourth presentation on the book of Job. This presentation has the same pattern as the third one. We will look at the second dialogue, examining the speeches for their tone and content, and then draw a conclusion for today. As some of you have noticed, translation matters very much in the case of the book of Job. So I remind you here of two possible alternative translations. The book of Job, translation, introduction and notes, translated by Raymond P. Scheindlin, and the wisdom books, Job, Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, a translation with commentary by Robert Alter. The book of Job is laid out in 5 sections. Number 1 is the prologue, introducing the characters and the plot. Number 2 is the dialogues with the 3 friends, where we find ourselves in this presentation. Number 3 is the dialogue with Elihu. Number 4 is when God finally speaks. And number 5 is the prose epilogue. The dialogues are very important in the book of Job, and they don't simply repeat from one cycle to the other. There's a gradual build-up of the case that Job wants to make against God. And a reminder about the poetry once more. The book of Job is, as we have noticed, very rich in its language and imagery. This is really meant to be felt, first of all, so it's a work of art. And the key really would be to read each speech very slowly to yourself before doing any sort of analysis. Only then will the book begin to make some sense and the build-up of emotion and logic. The second cycle takes us from chapter 15 to chapter 21. This time the first person to speak is ELIPHAZ in chapter 15, and Job responds in 16 to 17. BILDAD speaks in chapter 18, Job responds in chapter 19. ZOPHAR speaks in chapter 20, and Job responds in chapter 21. The speeches of the friends are somehow less complex than the speeches of Job. And a good example here is the speech of ELIPHAZ in Job chapter 15. In verses 1 to 16, he talks about the knowledge and the language of Job and suggests that Job subverts proper fear of God. And then in verses 17 to 35, he talks about the fate of the wicked, that there are always consequences for evil deeds. The tone in this speech is a forthright attack on Job's competence. Job does not know any more than his friends. And towards the end of the speech we read this verse: "What is man, that he should be pure, or one born of woman, that he should be righteous?" Job responds in 5 moments. In the introduction, 16:1 to 5, he dismisses the arguments of his friends as useless. Then in 16:6 to 17, he raises a complaint against God. God treats Job the way an enemy would treat him. In 16:18 to 17:1, there is a brief moment of hope. Job hopes for a reprieve. In 17:2 to 10, he goes back to complain against the friends, because none of them really experiences true wisdom. And then in 17:1 to 16, he ends with a moment of despair. Please admit that I am innocent. This time the mood is bitter about God and the friends, and also his personal mood swings between hope and really ends in despair. The teaching is Job insists on telling the truth about his condition, and he accepts no other explanations. And a key verse could be 16:12, I was in peace, and he has shattered me. He seized me by the neck and crushed me. He has made me his target. The speech of Bildad is rather more conventional. In 18:1-4, he appeals to Job to pay attention. And then in 18:5-21, he notes what happens to the wicked, the terrible consequences of sin, and no wicked person really escapes. In the speech of Bildad, all earlier sympathy is withdrawn, and the teaching is the traditional theology of retribution. Punishment follows sin, and if you are experiencing punishment, you must have sinned. 18:21 is a good summary. Surely such is the residence of an evil man, and this is the place of one who has not known God. Job again responds, this time in 4 moments. In the introduction, verses 1-5, he rejects the arguments of his friends. And then in verses 6-12, he describes God as a warrior who has besieged Job, and Job feels hemmed in, blocked on all sides. In 19:13-20, the friends have deserted Job, and Job's entire social world, friend, family, wife, children, is totally over. Nevertheless, in 19:21-29, Job hopes for a redeemer, someone who will vindicate him and bring him healing. The mood here is very emotional and angry, at the same time strangely hopeful and despairing. The teaching underneath is there must be a way out of this hell. And in verses 23 and 24, Job says, Oh, that my words were written down, oh, that they were written on a scroll, oh, that with an iron chisel and with lead they were engraved in a rock forever. Zophar is slightly more expansive than Bildad in his speech, though no less conventional. There is an introduction in verses 1-3. Zophar is moved to speak again. And then in verses 4-11, he describes the rapid fate of the wicked. Their joy and success are always short. And in 12-22, he notes the food of the wicked is poison. That is, what they consume turns against them inside them. This is a very powerful image for the inbuilt consequences of wicked actions. And then in verses 23-29, he moves from inbuilt consequences to punishments which await the just. And Zophar is convinced that God is absolutely just. Zophar in his speech is confident and clear. The teaching is straightforward. God punishes the wicked, their success turns on them like poison. And a key verse would be 20:29, such is the lot. God allots the wicked, and the heritage of his appointment from God. Job's last speech is also a bit more elaborate. He again employs an introduction. Job appeals for a hearing and, in some senses, regains his courage. And then in verses 7-16, he notes that the wicked enjoy happiness, and the wicked actually do very well if you just open your eyes. In 17-26, the wicked experience no disaster, and he observes there's no use in punishing their children, they will have got away scot-free. And in the last couple of verses, 27 to 34, Job rejects empty advice. Empty comfort is no comfort. This time Job is grimly realistic. There is no justice whatsoever. And the key verse perhaps is Job 21, 29 to 30. Have you never questioned those who travel the roads? Do you not recognize their accounts? That the evil man is spared from the day of his misfortune, that he is delivered from the day of God's wrath. By way of summary, we may notice that the friends are more openly conventional in the second cycle of dialogues. They repeat the usual doctrine of retribution, that God punishes the wicked in this life and rewards the good in this life. By contrast, Job is gradually building a case against God's justice. And this is built on three foundations. He rejects the emptiness of the advice of his friends and their more conventional theology. He holds on to his own bitter experience, and he invites people to look around and see how the wicked always seem to flourish and do well. So gradually, Job is building a case against God, as we shall see.